Good evening, everybody. Hi there. My name is Jim Stretton. I'm the Managing Director of ARC, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to ARC West London this evening and to this Foundation for Science and Technology event. FST has assembled a truly stellar panel for us this evening, and I can't wait to hear the discussion. But I will just beg one moment of your time and tell you a little bit about this incredible building that we're in here today. Now, I'm aware this building is rather different to FST's usual home in the Royal Society. For one thing, there's the number of Nobel Prize-winning discoveries made in this building is probably a little bit lower, but for now, let's say. We only finished this building a couple of months ago, having rebuilt it entirely. Previously, it was an ordinary office building, and we've rebuilt it from the ground up to be a world-class science facility, aiming to match anything you'd find anywhere in the world, Kendall Square or any other world-leading hub. In the basement, we have an incubator facility called LEAP, which we built with Imperial College, and where researchers and students can rent a single bench to do their early-stage discoveries. We then, on the ground floor, have an accelerator facility where we provide fully serviced lab spaces for companies working to make key scientific breakthroughs. And through the rest of the building, we have larger spaces ready to be fitted out as bespoke laboratories for businesses that are scaling up, commercializing their science, and getting ready to take over the world. In this building, you could go from your first idea to your scientific breakthrough and all the way on to your FTSE listing, all while having and enjoying some of the best views from any lab in the world. Obviously, I wrote this speech this morning when you could see the beautiful views of the Thames, which you can't now, but I promise you they are there, and it's and when Boat Race Day comes around, we'll be hosting another event then. Anyway, my dream is that this room, and in particular the bar next door, become where big ideas for new medicines get pitched, funding is raised, and real change for patients can begin. But a building and a place like this it can only work because of the strength of the wider ecosystem. And that brings me to my final point, which is about history. So 150 years ago, a Frenchman named Alexander Membray established a sugar refinery on this site. And that was off the back of a scientific breakthrough that he had made to improve the sugar refining process. Alexander chose to set up his business, which we know today as Tate & Lyle, here in London, not in Paris, and that was specifically because intellectual property protections at the time were stronger here than anywhere else on the continent. That gave Alexander the confidence to risk starting, building, and scaling up his business. Then, as now, policy and incentives matter profoundly. No doubt we'll get into some of those themes in today's discussion. So welcome to all of you again here to ARC West London, and let me please hand over to the chair of the FST, David Willetts.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jim. And look, and it is fantastic for us at the FST. As Jim said, we normally meet at the Royal Society, but to come out here to this fantastic ARC building. And we have really got the right people in the right place at the right time. This is absolutely the right place because if you heard this, it used to be conventional offices. It has been converted into wet lab space for scientists. That tells us something about the vigour of the life sciences in London and we hope around the UK. So it's absolutely the right place to do it and we appreciate the hospitality. It's also the right time because the government's life sciences plan was published in July and this is a great opportunity to take stock of it and to assess its strengths and its weaknesses and how to carry that agenda forward. And it is the right people, and we've got a fantastic panel. I'm very grateful to all four of our panelists who will all make distinctive contributions. We're going to start with Steve Bates. Steve, we first approached to do this, to speak here, when he was the chief executive of the Biotech Industry Association, a role he carried out with great distinction for 13 years, including, of course, a stint on the key vaccine task force during COVID. Now, Steve is the executive chair of the Office of Life Sciences. We do appreciate that Steve has honoured his original commitment to us. And if anything, it's even more important we hear from him now that he's got his new role. Steve, over to you.
And you can see the first thing I did when I got in the new job was get a haircut. So thank you very much, David, for inviting me, and thank you for ARC for having us. This is a building I have a long experience with, and in the bar later, I'll tell you about the job interview I had at Betfair many years ago, which if it had gone a different way, I wouldn't be standing here today. So I think my job is to give you an overview of the life science sector plan, which we're now going to talk about and discuss as we go through. So my job is to set the scene. Many of the people in the room were involved in the production of it over the past few months, but to give me a citer, how many people here would consider themselves as working in or supporting life sciences? So it's pretty much a life science crowd. Anybody who's not a life sciences person? Thank you, one or two. So this may be useful for you, so I'll take you through where we are. And do please, any questions that I'm pitching in the wrong direction, please help me. So they've given me some slides. This is my first time out as a government official with slides, so treat me gently. So where did it come from? New government's been in about a year. There's a health mission to build an NHS for the future. And obviously the Prime Minister and the Chancellor talk a lot about the growth mission for the nation. We need to grow the economy. Everybody went off and got busy and wrote a number of important but interlinking documents and strategies, of which I'm going to talk about three here. The 10-year health plan, published by the Department of Health, looking at how do we change the NHS to modernise it for the next period of time. The industrial strategy by the Department of Business, another 10-year plan to focus on business investment in 8 growth-driving sectors, of which life science is one, and then each sector went off and did their own thing in a coordinated fashion. And the middle one is the life science sector plan, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. So just to give you the framework and our articulation of how we fit this all together. And of course, one of the drives that Peter Kyle, the business secretary, keeps telling me about is it's very important that business adopt AI as part of this modernisation. So if you've not read 3 200-page documents in a few weeks, I can suggest there's this thing called ChatGPT. If you'll bung it in, then we're halfway to delivering our objective of adopting AI. I'm going to try and make it a summary for you in a few minutes as to where this sits. So this is the sector plan on a page. Our ambition is that the UK will, by 2030, be the leading life science economy in Europe, and by 2035, the third most important life science economy globally after the US and China. Big, hairy ambition, get on the podium and win. Targets. We're trying to make sure that all of these ambitions will be underpinned by investment targets for commercial research and development, particularly access to scale-up capital, access for patients to these new therapies. There's no point in doing this if we don't enable this to be used by citizens of the UK and by foreign direct investment. And the plan has got 33 actions. I'm going to spend 10 minutes on each of the 33 actions. I'm not across 3 strategic pillars, but the reason why I don't do that is actually there is a granular set of details within this which are really important. I think of them as the floor, not the ceiling, for what we need to do, but it has got into some granularity about what we need to do within the public sector to deliver, and it's quite useful for me to be able to hold to account lots of people and delivering those bits which will enable this to happen. In simple terms, we've got it in 3 boxes at the bottom. I realise it's a bit small for you at the back and probably in the wrong colours. Enabling world-class R&D. I suppose these are sort of Oxford and Cambridge colours, John. I hadn't really thought about it. It's the boat race theme, isn't it? We're going with the, yeah. I think Oxford's dark blue, Cambridge is light blue, I think. Making the UK an outstanding place in which to start, grow, scale and invest is the second of the pillars. And the third is to drive health innovation and NHS reform, because we need to do it together with our colleagues in the NHS. So that's the plan on the page. 6 headline actions. Realising a health data research service. I'm not going to talk too much about this. There's others on the panel who are more expert on this. Slashing trial set-up times, which has been a problem for 150 days. If you want the slides, I'm probably able to share them. I'm hoping I'm able to share them. Backing manufacturing. We're running an industrial strategy. David, you know about this from your time as a minister. It's sometimes been hard to compete globally with other countries who do have the ability to support investment decisions with some support from the government. That has been changed in recent times, and it gives us a much more competitive footing, enabling investment to be attracted here rather than rejected because there's no government support. Streamlining regulation and market access. The world is moving fast in this area, as is the science, and I think we're really blessed by having in Lawrence Talon and the new MHRA, the medicines regulator, leadership that is thinking very cleverly about both the AI-enabled world and how fundamental science is changing what you can do and how you can take a risk-proportionate approach. Low friction procurement, getting stuff into the NHS easier. It's very hard to sell to the NHS. There's so much of it, so many different bits of it. How they do it is very complicated, but there's some new ways in which we're going to try and do that through a rules-based pathway. And the one that I like, the innovation passport. Why we need a passport to get from one bit of Britain to another, I don't quite understand, but it does seem that what this basically is going to do is if something has been adopted and validated in one city, the next city along can't say, no, we don't like it because we don't like your football team. You've got to adopt it, and you don't need to do the tests once again. And I think partnering with industry, this is the commitment from government to do this is really part of the strategy, and it goes to the point you were making, David, that I learned during my time on the vaccine task force that when you put together the best of British public sector and the best of British private sector at pace, we are small enough to be exquisitely networked, and when we do that well, we are large enough to be globally impactful. And I think we're finding new ways of doing that. And this is something that other countries find harder than the UK. We're actually quite good at being a public-private partnership, so it's a competitive advantage. And I already in my few weeks in the job, I've seen that in action in terms of the work that's being done with BioNTech, and got some meetings this week with some other players who are interested. Before the world turns up for London Life Science Week next week, where there's over 100 events promoting life sciences in the UK. So government buzzword is delivery. I always think it should be milkman delivery, but I mean, it means making stuff happen and not just talking about it. So there's some real money, which really, really helps make this happen, whether it be through UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, or the National Institute for Health Research. There's management process, ministerially chaired life science delivery boards. I know this is probably the most exciting thing you're going to hear about, but actually making these things happen in Whitehall and Westminster often takes repeated and continuous transparency and oversight, and there's a functioning mechanism to do that. There's actually somebody named in the plan, or a person responsible. If it's not a person, it's a job, and that job is the person who's going to fill this. And it's been developed with these other two pieces together so that at least we can talk to and engage with the other sectors. The Office for Life Science is a bit of a strange beast in government. It sits across now 3 departments, based from very near Patrick Valence's office in the Department for Science, but also in the Department of Health and Department of Business and Trade. And I have the privilege and the shoe leather of walking between all of those most days, but it's actually about putting these things together. I'm going to finish with some examples of progress that have happened in the few short weeks. So others may talk about the BioNTech agreement deal reached ahead of the formal launch of the document, but I had the privilege of sitting with John Bell during a recent oversight of that group to see what's happening both in terms of clinical trials. The stuff that's happening on cancer vaccines is immense. The work that's being done to validate genomic processes is really, really exciting. If you go to the Northwest, the partnership with Lilly to tackle obesity through the Obesity Pathway Innovation Programme is really exciting, and looking at new ways that you can get data out of that economy, not just a health economy, to look at the impact that GLP-1s can make. The best picture opportunity I've been to in this job so far was the big opening of the big Moderna factory up at Oxfordshire, now able to produce 250 million vaccine doses a year. The UK remains committed to pioneering science and technology in mRNA because we think it's a technology that may have and has serious promise. And I think companies that are pioneering in that space like the fact that there's continued scientific endeavour. If you think about it, the UK did quite well in a period of time where stem cell research became more difficult in competitor nations. I think, again, staying true to the course of science during periods where others may be vacillating on this is a competitive advantage. And a name that many of you may not know is Convatec. They're opening a big site, not here in Arc, but City Labs in Manchester, which is going to do R&D in advanced wound care. MedTech is also a strength for the UK, and there's some really interesting businesses there. So I hope that's given you a whistle-stop tour of the plan, how it fits in the government strategy, and some of the ways we're delivering it alongside some progress. I'll stop there and hand over to Tony.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was a fantastic start and very useful presentation. As well as welcoming people here physically, I should also have welcomed our online participants. And you can, of course, put questions on Slido, which I'll be tracking on my laptop on the Slido number, hashtag 1712288. So as well as physical questions, we'll have online questions when we've heard from all four of our participants. We're now going to hear from Tony Wood, Chief Scientific Officer at the GSK since 2022, radically shifted GSK's research agenda into areas like functional genomics. Thank you so much for being with us, Tony. Over to you.
Well, first of all, hi everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, David. It's a pleasure to be part of such an esteemed group of speakers. That includes you as well, Steve. So really pleased to be here. What I'm going to try and do in the 10 minutes that I have is give you a sense of how I see the plan through the lens of the role that I have right now. To give you a little bit of history, I've been in the industry now for more than 30 years. I know I don't look old enough, but there you go. And I've worked both in the UK and the US in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I've lived in the really the melting pot of what was seen as the innovative driver. And over that period of time, I've seen the way in which we approach drug discovery and development mature and change. And I think we're at a pivotal point now. I'm not going to describe what that is for a few minutes, but just hold that thought. So first of all, let me start with why it is we need a new approach to drug discovery and development through the lens of an R&D professional who also, of course, worries about delivering medicines and vaccines to the people that we care about to improve health. And whilst there's no doubt that in the 30 years that I've been doing this, and a lot of my early career was very involved in HIV. I'm lucky enough to have discovered an HIV medicine way back in the 1990s. And we've taken that disease from a death sentence now to something which is almost a chronic livable condition. People living with HIV essentially take one tablet a day or increasingly get a long-acting injection that protects them from the progression of their disease. Vaccines, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, probably the single biggest impact on world health after clean water. So we've made fantastic progress here. And actually, for many reasons, people are living much longer than they have, largely speaking. I think we're only just starting to see those curves now start to begin to dip. But unfortunately with that, and the fact that there are now more 60-year-olds than there are 5-year-olds in the UK, the sad fact is that a longer life doesn't always equate to a healthier one. And in addition to that, if one bears in mind that once you've had a single disease, your chances of a second one increase. So although we think about it in the way we research disease as a singular proposition, actually multimorbidity is the much greater problem that we face. And every year, chronic diseases are responsible for something like 43 million deaths worldwide. And to give you an example, this includes underlying pathobiological conditions like fibrosis. I'm going to come back to that at the end of the talk, but to emphasize that nearly 45% of all deaths have some pathobiological component of fibrosis associated with them. People living with dementia are expected to reach 78 million individuals by 2030. And of course, we have cancer, where cases continue to rise and tragically are becoming more and more prevalent in younger populations, particularly colon cancer, for example. All of this, of course, has a massive impact on patients and their families and comes with substantial economic cost. The G20 loses about $1 trillion of productivity each year from preventable conditions in people aged 50 to 64. And if any of you are interested in all of this, the book that I would suggest you read, because it's fascinating, and if you ever get a chance to hear him talk, is Andrew Scott's text on the longevity imperative. And what he's offering there is the need for a radical rethink towards healthy aging. And that's across economic, social, health, and scientific fronts. He makes the point there that when we're ill in our 80s, living to our 90s holds limited appeal. And importantly, though, that when we're healthy, we look forward to next generations. And in fact, the principle here is that it is our 30-year-old self and the decisions that we take that influences the health of our 50-year-old self, and so on. And so I'm using this to introduce the concept that preemption or prevention is an important component of what I think about in the R&D that we do at GSK. And in fact, there's a growing field associated with the science of aging, the exploration of biological pathways to allow earlier intervention, and the connection of those pathways to subsequent sequelae so that we are able to make a bridge between preventative actions and a framework of treatment that we already currently understand in the context of regulation. The hope, of course, is that better understanding of age-related diseases is ultimately going to lead to treatments and preventions, as I've just mentioned, and for us in particular at GSK, thinking about a healthy aging immune system is very much at the top of our agenda. But alongside all of that, we've got to make a move to improve the productivity of R&D, which currently still is woefully resistant to many of the actions that we've taken over my career to improve that survival. For example, phase 1 assets still only have a 13% chance of finding their way ultimately to the market. Well, that's all the challenge and the current situation and the bad news. Let me tell you about why I'm standing here, and I'm excited to be doing the job that I currently do. And look, the answer stands for me in fantastic advances in science and technology. When I started in the industry as a medicinal chemist, pretty much you could guarantee that you only found out approximately about whether or not you understood a disease when you were one of the rare individuals who was lucky enough to design a medicine that actually had success. And that process you'll have all seen on numerous step charts that talk about the individual phases of what we do. Well, the good news is that past is firmly behind us. For the first time now, we're in a position where we can measure disease before we try to start to intervene and design molecules for that purpose. What that allows us to do is provide transformative opportunities for preemption because we can get at underlying pathobiology. In GSK, we're investing significantly in collaborations to build that understanding. In fact, we have a number of them in the UK. And let me just share with you a few very quick examples. I'll start with steatotic liver disease, and in particular, MASH, the metabolic component of it. It affects 12 million people globally. Through the work that we've done with UK Biobank and other partners, we're now increasingly getting to a point where I can draw a straight line between a molecular target in MASH, validated by human genetics, through individual points, all the way through the intervening layers of biology, in which every single layer of that, if it's successful, increases the probability of success of the next one, all the way through now almost to a regulatory endpoint. And I can do that without reaching for a single pipette or laboratory to design a molecule. And the beauty of that is once I've done it for that disease, I don't get one target, I get 10 or 20, a complete list of them. And so that really is what the future is about. The same is true for us in COPD, where we're building capabilities there. A disease that impacts 300 million people globally. A disease for which, if you are unlucky enough to be admitted to a hospital or an emergency room, you have a 50% chance of survival 5 years later, worse than many heart diseases. What we're doing there is integrating across similar sets of phenotypes in human genetics and data and our own scaled studies to bring a unique approach to resolving that particular disease. So with all of that said, what does this mean for the life sciences? And if you accept my thesis that we're now in a world whereby we can measure disease before we choose to intervene, what that does is puts the patient firmly at the center of everything we do, right from the beginning through to the end. And in order to do that, collaboration is absolutely essential. I do not run longitudinal studies. My job is comparative studies looking at the efficacy of medicines. I need to collaborate with academic university centers in order to generate those data. The UK, I think, has a fundamental opportunity to lead in this area, but it's important to recognize that the competitive pace globally is significant. Obviously, the US remains a strong competitor due to its market and science base. But if we look at China, life sciences capabilities and expertise is increasing exponentially. My colleagues visited China only a few weeks ago, and the pace of change there is enormous. By mid-2025, Chinese firms accounted for 42% of all of the greater than $50 million licensing deals globally. And China now accounts for something like 55 to 60% of all new registered antibody drug conjugates globally. So, to put it bluntly, when we look at the scale, I don't think the UK can compete with China and the US from that standpoint, but what it can do, and can do very effectively, is compete on the front of translational research networks. The point that I've made, the intersection of these across academic centers, university hospitals, and industry allows us to develop unique understandings of disease, and more importantly, put in place verification cycles once those lists of targets have been established. At GSK, as I mentioned, we have significant collaborations with Oxford, with Cambridge, with King's College, and I will continue to build these as we go forward. And then lastly, and I'm running a little out of time, so I will accelerate. I have one more point to make, that all of this is anchored in data. And at the center of it, the Health Data Research Service is critical to our success here. In order to link across these different scales, it is important that we make the HDRS the unique force that it can be for the UK. We are working closely with the HDRS on a program looking at our shingles vaccination, where we have substantial real-world evidence to suggest a benefit in dementia. And the opportunity here, of course, is enormous for the aging population, as well as for the UK, to be able to show a significant progress in an important area of science that can only be resolved in this way. So, to summarize then, I strongly believe that the time is right, technology is changing how we do this, and the UK has a unique opportunity through translational research networks and the HDRS to be a leading force in that. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Tony, for that perception from the industry side, and very interesting and important. I'm now delighted to welcome Baroness Nicola Blackwood. I remember her being elected as, I think, the first female MP for Oxford. Now a colleague in the House of Lords, has served, of course, as a minister in the Department of Health and Social Care, now chairs Oxford University Innovation, and also chairs Genomics England. Nicola, it's fantastic you're here. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, David, and it's a tremendous pleasure to be here this evening to such a great crowd. It's a bit intimidating, to be honest, to be sandwiched in between two great scientists like Tony and John. So just to make it completely clear, I'm here for the policy perspective. Don't ask me any technical scientific questions, but I'm also here to speak about Genomics England as a case study on how we can invest in our life sciences assets and how long-term political commitment, investment, policy alignment can really drive better care, NHS productivity, and global investment through public-private partnerships when they are done well. And we heard a little bit about that from Steve. So I'm going to turn very specifically to what we do at Genomics England. And our vision is a world where everyone benefits from genomic healthcare, and we describe that by this infinity loop here. And on the left side, as you can see, is healthcare, where you have patients and clinicians working together through the Genomics Medicine Service. And we enable the NHS to deliver the world's first nationwide whole genome sequencing service. And since its launch in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, we were ambitious. We have now helped over 100,000 patients, and we are scaling fast. On the right side, as you can see there, is research, both academic and industry partners interrogating the data in our secure research environment. And Genomics England sits in the center. We operate the sequencing pipeline, we manage the data infrastructure, we translate research back into clinical practice. And the power of this model is that those two loops, they are self-reinforcing. The diagnostic discoveries made in the research environment, they flow back into the clinic, and of course consented clinical data replenishes our data set for further discovery. Now, I'm not going to say that getting to this point has been straightforward. I don't think any UK infrastructure ever has been. Embedding genomics into routine healthcare has meant redesigning clinical pathways, training thousands of clinicians, and making genomics more mainstream aware, building public trust at every step at a time when concerns about data are very high. It's required years of very close partnership with the NHS and a determination not just to prove that the science worked, but to build a system that could adopt it, which has often been a downfall of our systems. This is inherently translational, as Tony has said. But the payoff, when you get it right, is a virtuous cycle that generates three forms of return. A return for participants, which is better diagnostics, better therapeutics. A return for the NHS through better productivity and efficiency through stratification, screening, early intervention. And a return for the UK through increased R&D investment and clinical innovation. Now, I think it's important that we don't forget that none of this works without public trust. At the heart of our model is the participants panel, patients and families who directly advise our board. They safeguard consent. They ensure that data is always used responsibly and for the public good. And that trust that they have helped us build ensures that 95% of patients who are asked, they say yes to the research use of that data, which is critical for the data set being of use nationally. But of course, we know that genomic data alone is not enough. It only becomes powerful when it is linked to other information, clinical records, pathology, radiology, transcriptomics. So we invest very heavily in quality and linkage with other national data initiatives like the Cancer Registry, the National Pathology Imaging Collaborative. And this is a great example of how the UK can really leverage the scale and interconnectedness of the NHS when it gets it right. And that's why our research environment, as you can see here, now hosts over 700 active projects, more than 1,500 accredited researchers, including 7 out of 10 of the world's global pharmas by market cap, all working with that data. And it's the scale and the richness of the data set which makes that discovery possible. And we are seeing discoveries flow in now thick and fast. If we look at the work of Dr. Jack Bartram, you can see it reported there. He's a consultant hematologist at Great Ormond Street. He looked at what happened when he introduced whole genome sequencing into his routine practice, and the results were striking. In 81% of cases, whole genome sequencing provided additional information for diagnosis. In 24% of cases, it changed management of the condition, and in 14% of cases, it reclassified diagnosis entirely. But genomics isn't always about condition management. Sometimes it doesn't just guide care, it can spare children from having treatment that they never needed in the first place. Baby Oliver, who you can see there with his very happy parents, he was born with a 6-centimetre tumour on his leg. Under the microscope, it looked like a very aggressive cancer, infantile fibrosarcoma. The molecular tests, they just were inconclusive. And so it required whole genome sequencing to tell the full story. It wasn't cancer at all. It was a benign myofibroma. And because of that single test, baby Oliver, a newborn, was spared any chemo and he was spared surgery, which is a major win at that age. And these are the results that a system which is built for discovery driven into care. And one of the clearest examples that we can tell you about is how national scale genomics drove the discovery of Renew syndrome. By the time he was 12, Charlie, who you can see there on the front page of the Sunday Times, he'd been through years of investigations, a long diagnostic odyssey, trying to understand his severe learning disability. But all of the standard tests, they just got them no closer to understanding what was going on. It was only when his genome was analysed critically within the National Genome Research Library, alongside thousands of others, that the pattern began to emerge. Children with the same variant of RNU42, which is a tiny non-coding gene, they were found to share the same developmental features. Now, there are no therapies as yet, but now that the genetic cause is known, discovery and research can begin, and crucially, his family and the thousands like him have hope that they will find an answer. But the clue here is that the discovery of Renew variant was only made possible because of Genomics England's data infrastructure and the scale of it, linking individual cases across the NHS to reveal patterns that no individual clinician, not even any individual institution, would have been able to understand. And the principle is the same in cancer. By linking whole genomes with pathology, radiology, clinical records, we're creating a rich data set. And when you combine that multimodal data with AI, the results are becoming very powerful. Researchers are already starting to detect cancer subtypes that were invisible before. They're predicting tumors which will behave aggressively. They're starting to identify new treatment targets. And you can see here some of the recent work our data set has uncovered, the genomic drivers of one of the most aggressive forms of bone cancer and why it is resisting treatment. And in another project, researchers developed an AI approach to scan across whole genomes to pick up hidden indel mutations, which standard sequencing panels often miss. And these are the kinds of mutations that can change treatment decisions and outcomes for patients. So they are meaningful in the clinic as well as in research. But of course, we only stay competitive, as Tony said, if we keep pushing forward the frontiers of genomic healthcare. And that is what the Generation study is all about. It is the world's first pilot of whole genome sequencing, genomic screening at birth through the National Health System. So far, we're making great progress. Over 25,000 babies have been recruited across more than 50 hospitals. We're testing for 200 rare but treatable conditions at birth, giving children the best start in life and abolishing that diagnostic odyssey which Charlie experienced. Now, I'm not going to pretend to anyone here that that will be easy. Just like I spoke of earlier with Genomics Medicine Service, this means re-engineering newborn screening workflows. It means training midwives. It means earning the trust of new parents at one of the most vulnerable moments in their lives. But that's exactly the kind of work that we need to put in place if we are serious about shifting genomics from reactive and research environments into predictive public health. So where do we think this is heading? I'm sure we'll hear more about this later from the scientists, but genomics is now one of the big bets in the NHS 10-year plan and the life sciences strategy. It is central to the government's vision for a transformed health system. This looks like a lifelong relationship with the genome in which an estimated half of all health interactions will be genomically enabled, unlocking things like risk prediction of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, unlocking precision prescribing through pharmacogenomics, earlier, better targeted screening using polygenic risk and other mechanisms. It looks like faster, more efficient trials, which have a better chance of a success rate, as Tony mentioned, for personalized therapies. The truth is we are in the foothills of this journey. We need sustained political commitment to build on the assets and the investment which we have already built. We need policy alignment across research, healthcare, and industry partners, and we need to define those key public-private partnerships in order to realize that vision. But we've demonstrated that we can already go ahead of the herd when we drive these missions and we identify what we are good at. Let's make sure that we don't lose the advantage in the next decade. I know that John Bell is going to stand up now and tell us exactly how we're going to achieve that.
Great, thank you very much, Nicola. What a fantastic introduction to John. Professor Sir John Bell, the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford for over 20 years, and who also has played a crucial role in some of our most important life sciences initiatives, from the creation of Genomics England to the creation of the UK Biobank. I remember his wise advice on life sciences. I think he's been an advisor on life sciences and life sciences strategy to many British ministers. I wonder what he found easier to deal with, British ministers or American billionaires. John, over to you.
David, thanks very much, and thanks to the previous speakers, because they've laid a perfect format for me just to make a few comments. So from a personal perspective, this has been an amazing journey, because I started advising on life sciences when Paul Drayson was the Minister for Life Sciences and created the original Office of Life Sciences, and then rumbled through God knows how many prime ministers. Some of that was good, some of that was less good. We did a pandemic somewhere along the way, which was sort of okay. But over the course of all that, I've had an opportunity to engage many of the people in this room, but the wider life sciences community has really thrived in the UK over the past 20 years. And under Theresa May's government, when the discussion was we should do some industrial strategy, people said, well, what are we going to do industrial strategy in? Because we're not good at anything. Everybody said, it's got to be life sciences. And actually, that's what happened. It was the leading industrial strategy. We had 3 sector deals before anybody had any other ones. I mean, it was just, we were miles ahead. And that's because, and this was an observation that Alan Langland's made, who had chaired Biobank for many years, and that is that we as a group, we hunt as a pack, and we try and work together wherever we can. And that includes all the various components of the bits that make this successful. The very powerful academic research programs and the universities are crucial to this. The NHS, despite all our challenges, is still absolutely crucial to our success as a life sciences hub. Government and government funders are crucial, as are the charities. They all contribute a lot to what we're trying to do. And then this now growing network of small companies and the involvement of many of the global big, large companies in the UK, it knits it all together so that we can actually deliver the things that we've been asked to do by government and make a difference. So it's a really interesting journey, and I think one of the things that I've learned to accept is that some stuff you just can't do. So don't bang your head against the wall, because there's always something else you can do, and you should just keep bouncing around and making progress in some domains. There are 50 things we could do. If you can't do A, do B. If you can't do B, do C. And that's sort of how we as a community have got to where we've gotten to. And the difference in terms of the scale and capacity of our life sciences sector today, even compared to 2016 when we wrote the first industrial strategy, is actually quite dramatic. And I think we've seen the growth of small companies into mid-sized companies. We've had an enormous amount of success around our big programs. And the amount of economic growth that we get from this sector is clearly evident to everybody. So I think that's a fantastic place to be. Is it all perfect? It's not. So we've had last few months been a bit bumpy, and understandably so. When stuff gets out of alignment with the rest of the world, then you can understand why the commercial players say, well, hang on a minute. You know, if you don't buy the drugs, then don't expect us to do R&D. That's fine. I'm hoping there'll be a solution to that problem sometime in the not too distant future, and I think we'll be able to weather that one without, I think, too much more difficulty. But I do think that the message I've got for you tonight is that we should really think about what we're good at and lean into what we're good at, because we're not going to be good at everything. And Tony has alluded to China. I mean, China is eye-wateringly powerful at the moment. And if you stand China next to America at the moment, they're winning, I tell you that. They've got more stuff in play. Their biotech sector is really thriving. You know, if you need an antibody, go to China. You can have 25 antibodies against the same target. I mean, they've done it, interestingly, they've done it by sheer hard work. So they work hard, they generate stuff. And so my view about this is we need to work much more in concert, which I'm going to get into trouble now with Whitehall. Don't go into the House of Lords and start telling them that I'm saying this. But anyway, truth is, if we don't work in synergy with them, we're going to end up coming head to head with them, and we will not win that fight. So we do need to understand. Now, if we were making drones and tools for cybersecurity, you can kind of understand why we might not want to work with China. But given the fact we're all trying to develop solutions to healthcare problems, I don't see what the big deal about security is about. And, you know, I know everybody's worried about IP, but if somebody wants to steal my IP and set up a company in China, good luck to them. You know, what I really want is clearance to operate in the rest of the world. So I think we do need to think about what are the things that we're good at. And then just to draw on a couple of comments that Tony made, which I think are really important, and that is, in identifying what we're going to do, there's this issue about what have we shown ourselves really capable of doing? What are the advantages we have in the UK? And I'll mention a few of those in a minute. But we have to, I think, be really focused on patients. So this is about, our mission is not to publish Nature papers, although it's fun if you do that on the way, that's all great. And it's also not to make a ton of money, although I'm sure the Treasury would love us to make a ton of money. It's actually to make life much better for patients. And I think if we've got to stick to that North Star, because as soon as we drift off that, then one of the major motivations of supporting life sciences just disappears. And so we do need to think about that as the way we think about going forward. And then the second thing we need to think about, we also need to think about how are we going to deliver healthcare to the population. And we have in the UK this single-payer healthcare system, which is really unique and a terrific asset to have from a whole variety of perspectives. But as you know, this healthcare system, as well as every other healthcare system on the planet, is now in terrible trouble. The amount of money going in is vast, and it keeps going up. The system isn't working. Productivity has fallen off a cliff. They've hired too many doctors, which is not helpful, and the whole thing is in real trouble. So I do think, as part of the thinking about how do we make things better for patients, not only do we have to think about individual therapies for small and large diseases, we also have to think about how does that fit with a healthcare system that can deliver those to patients. Because there are lots of innovations that could make a massive difference to healthcare that never get to the patients who need them. And I think that is something that we do need to think about much more systematically. And one of the things that I've been thinking about pretty actively in the last few years was alluded to by Tony, and that is we've got a healthcare system designed in the 1950s. It's extended life expectancy by 15.7 years since it was invented. That's not bad. I would argue that's the biggest achievement of any human endeavor in the last 100 years, or maybe the entire history of humankind. Now, the guys who send people to the moon would say, no, that's much better. But honestly, would you rather have 15.7 more years of life or send a rocket to the moon? I think it's a really easy decision. This is the best thing that humankind has ever done. And we are very much part of that. And many of those successes have come from the UK. So I think we've got a healthcare system that isn't working. We've got all the opportunities which have been described by Tony and Nicola and Steve. And the real question is, how do we blend those things so that we can actually help solve how we deliver healthcare much more effectively? And I really do think we have to go from an event-based, late-stage, let's prop them up when they get chest pain, to a much more, actually, you're aggregating risk over your lifetime from a whole variety of different factors. We know what they are. And in fact, now we've got therapies that would allow you to intervene in those in most cases. Why the heck aren't we doing that? And so this is the boring bit, but the bit that really will make a difference. And that is if we can develop approaches to deliver those things to interfere with the natural history of disease at a much earlier stage. So I think that sort of sets the stage of the things that that's how I frame the way I think about the life sciences. We need to think about all those things. And then in no particular order, we also have to think about what do we want to get out of this in addition to healthier people, longer life expectancies? Well, one of the things we're interested in is we're trying to have a country where economic growth is significant, where we can live better lifestyles because we're successful economically. Life sciences is a place where we can actually do that by the discoveries we make. But the other thing is that it's also really clear that in the absence of an effective healthcare system that deals with this problem of comorbidity and chronic disease and prevention, the drag on the economy of a very large number of people who are sick and who are out of the economic workforce is a disaster. And those of you who saw Charlie Mayfield's report last week will see exactly what that means. We spend $85 billion a year propping up the very significant numbers of people, and it's in the millions, who are off work because of sickness. And many of those illnesses, in fact, you could argue almost all of those illnesses, are treatable and manageable, and you can flatten that morbidity curve. So when you're talking about economics, this is not just health economics, this is macroeconomics, and we need to focus on that as part of the things we want to do. So just to drop back into the things that I think we as a community have particular expertise in, Nicola's given us a great example of Genomics England. The ability of the government to help support big projects that are done by the whole community. They're not owned by any one group or one university or one of this or that, but they're things that are done by the whole country. And the examples are UK Biobank, which is the first, and I can tell you for sure, everybody said that UK Biobank wasn't going to work. And in fact, it got turned down, where's Patrick Chinnery? It got turned down by either 2 or 3 MRC committees before I persuaded George Verrata just to do it, so took it to council. Anyway, the UK Biobank is probably the ultimate global success in cohorts. Genomics England has put us in the pole position for genomics, which is going to be a driving force in life sciences. And our future health, of course, is steaming along. 2.5 million people recruited, a really exciting opportunity to blend with this prevention agenda, which I've just been talking about. So the cohorts are great. I think we've also got real opportunities to take advantage of data. And, we've all talked about data, and I think we're on the verge, I hope, of getting data in a better place. It's got steadily better, but it needs, I think, a big inflection point to get it into a good place. And data is going to drive a lot of the things that we do really effectively over the next few years. I also think that we need to think a little bit about how we blend that data story with the clinical trials story. So we've talked about clinical trials for too long, trying to make it better. But as Steve alluded to the meeting we had with BioNTech, the truth is when we want to do clinical trials really well in the UK, we can do it better than anybody. And BioNTech came and tried to do clinical trials here 3 years ago and failed and was just packing up all their stuff, putting them in the back of the lorry, taking them back to Germany. And somebody said, look, we can do better than this. And we enlisted the NHS. Peter Johnson, who runs the cancer program in the NHS, we populated a number of really good sites with pathology support, which is what they needed. We built a system. And then we started again. And the recruitment into their first big cancer vaccine trial, the UK did more than everybody else on the planet and allowed them to complete their trial a year early. That is worth a lot of value. And now they've got another half a dozen trials in play. Their second big trial, again, is recruiting faster than everybody on the planet. So I think we tend to beat ourselves up saying, oh my God, we don't know how to do trials. The truth is we do know how to do it, but we just need to line ourselves up. Probably therapeutic area by therapeutic area. Choose the areas that we want to play and run with it. We've got a great regulator in the MHRA. We're all ready to go. We've got, I think, real opportunities, particularly in the cancer space, to think a little bit harder about how early diagnostics will actually help us get to a better place in that space. So that's just a random list of stuff that comes across my desk. But they're all things that you have been working on. They're all things that I think we should be really proud of, and we should make a real push to see if we can keep those right at the front of the competition in the coming years. So thanks very much.
Invite all our speakers up to the stage. Yes, Steve.
Great. Well, excellent presentations. Lots of issues arising from them. And thank you, John, for ending on a note just, again, of the opportunities and the fact that Britain is actually, in many ways, well placed to seize them. So here is an opportunity for you to put your questions. We've got a roving mic. I'll also, at the right point, turn to our Slido interventions as well. But who here? Right, let us set the ball rolling. Sorry, we've carefully sent the microphone to the back, and we're now bringing it rush forward to the front. Great, yep.
Hello. Oh, that's very loud. Hello, my name is Frances Downey. I'm Head of Science and Research Policy at Cancer Research UK. As many of you will know, Cancer Research UK invests 400 million every year in the UK R&I system, investing from discovery through to partnership with industry, and also leveraging in investment into the economy. I was wondering if the panel could reflect on the role of research charities in delivering the life sciences sector plan. Also thinking about not just what I just talked about, but also thinking about CRUK and other research charities as mission-based. And as you were saying, Sir John, that real focus on patient and patient impact, and perhaps what other funders could learn from us.
Yeah, and let's move along the panel that way, because as your final remarks, John, were about cancer. Why don't we start with you and then move along? Yep.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned it in my comments, and I'll say it again. You know, one of the real assets that we've got in the UK are very powerful charities that actually raise money, and the money very often goes into the research agenda, which is terrific. We've had the benefit of the disease-specific charities, but we've also had the benefit of the Wellcome Trust. And we mustn't forget that the Wellcome Trust, when they cashed in their chips in the late 80s or the early 90s, that was a major inflection point for UK biomedical science, because although government funding was okay, it just added a huge dimension to what everybody does in this space. So I think it's been a terrific asset. I think the one thing that I do worry a little bit about is, so first of all, I'm a fan of mission-based research. I don't think it all should be mission-based, but I think we should choose some things that we're really going to go after. And I'm not sure we've got the mechanisms to line everybody up around missions. I think CRUK goes off, they do your grand challenges, and then MRC goes off and you do your grand challenges. And I'm just not sure that's the best way to do it. I think there should be a bit more alignment, and we need to think about how we do that.
I mean, obviously, agree with the great value of research charities and the enormous contribution that has been made to building up the strength of the life sciences sector, which John has mentioned. I think what often is not sort of called out quite so much is the role that research charities have in building the physical infrastructure, the centres and the sites, which are so hugely valuable, but also the pipeline of researchers by funding, early stage career researchers and so on. And that is obviously very critical given the current state of our research environment. And I think making sure that we understand the role and the different touch points that research charities have within strengthening and maintaining the growth and resilience of the life sciences sector is what is so critical. And I know that you do a lot of work in communicating that individually and through AMRC, but I think that we can all understand that better as partners and support you in making sure that we are good partners with you.
Yeah, I think a couple of things to stress. First of all, the model that I described requires trust from patients, and I think charities bring probably the leading opportunity for that. The other thing, quite frankly, is that we often forget that the most significant experts in the diseases we're researching are the patients themselves. And so this idea of a proper input of patients at the center of the process, I think is absolutely critical to success. And without charity involvement, it just is much, much harder.
Steve, and also feel free, you've heard the other three presentations. Any wider reflections you have as well?
Well, I'll start on the point Tony makes about the role of research charities. I think one of the crucial things I've discovered in my time is that when research charities explain the priorities of patients as a research priority, it's really helpful. If you're a small company and you're in an area, the place you want to start is with the patient charity document about what they really care about, because if you're not solving what they really care about, you're not going to end up with something that NICE are going to want or the patients are going to want. So they've done the real market research for you as a company, and it's one of those things that I always say to small companies, that's they're telling you what they want. The other thing I would agree with Nicola is you stressed physical capability. I think it is the human capital that you mentioned. So many people have had some sort of touch point or have got their career going or have had some program that's been partnered with a charity that really nobody else would go to, whether that be a big company, whether that be the one that was turned down by the government grant. Actually, that stuff is really, really vital. The second arrow in your flesh, whatever it is, really makes a difference. And I think we're really lucky to have that in our ecosystem. And I think not only do we have Wellcome from the past, but I look at the royalties from Keytruda that have gone back in to give LifeArc a real boost. And I think we only need one or two more of those to come off, and another two charities will be at the size and scale of that. So actually, the canniness of our charity sector is actually also a growth potential for the UK that I don't think you see in charities in other parts of the world.
I'm just going to slightly lower the tone by saying I think you've had 4 wonderful paeans of praise to the medical charities and the research you fund, and that's great. There is a school of thought that when we look at the close to financial crisis in scientific research and universities, if everybody is trying to fund it at the rate of 70% of its full economic cost, and even an organisation with the resource of Wellcome is not willing to fund it at 100% of its full economic cost, there is a very serious problem. And I think the model for funding research is going to change, and one of the reasons is nobody's willing to pay 100% of the cost. And the charities are not immune from creating that problem. So I'm sorry to lower the tone, but that is the other side of it. Now we've got several other, let's collect, there's 2 hands up there, let's collect them.
Hi, Hakim Yadi, partner at Baringa, working across health and life sciences. I want to pick up on a point that Sir John made, in that we've come a long way since the first life science sector plan back in 2011. I think we're to be commended as a community on that. But I remember being in a room at the Wellcome Trust working on that sector plan, and there was no one in the room from the NHS then. We now have a life sciences sector plan, everything to be commended. We have a 10-year plan in the NHS, a lot to be commended. Does the panel think that we have the right mechanisms to connect those two plans, both in terms within the OLS, but also within the community, because they seem to be running sometimes not entirely in a unified way?
Thank you. And let's just collect one other question as well behind. Yep, there we are.
Thanks very much. Yes, Peter Marsh, I'm a journalist. We heard about the plan or the goal for Britain to become the world's #3 nation in life sciences by the 2030s. How are you going to measure that? Is that in terms of all this marvellous research, benefits to patients that you've been talking about, we've heard about, or is it the commercialisation of these ideas, businesses earning money from it, and then does it matter whether those businesses are British businesses or global non-British businesses?
Yeah, Steve, I think they both are. Let's start with you on both of those key questions.
So I think Sir John Bell was right that the ultimate impact of life sciences is the impact it makes on human health and perhaps planetary health, if we're going to be broader than that. But I think we would take it in terms of a combination of factors around investment, the size of, we measure the size of the economic footprint. I think it's about being at the cutting edge of some of those treatments. And I think in a globalised world, in which the UK is a relatively small part, we've got to be realistic about the ownership and capital support that's available to scale businesses. At the moment, we've got a sector which is almost entirely reliant, certainly in its scaling factor, on money that comes from outside the UK. If we could rebalance that a little so that we had some board directors being from UK-based money, that would be a good thing. And we may have, but you never know, it only takes one or two companies to knock it out of the park, and those may not necessarily all come from either Shanghai or Silicon Valley in the next 10 years. We do have the potential. John might want to talk about some of the GLP-1s that have gone to great heights, being sold for billions of pounds, which are based around technology that comes from science from the UK, and why they go on that journey. I think we're building the capital community to be able to do that. Companies have to be able to operate in a global environment, and I'm conscious of how that works. But if you can scale them to a certain size, then you can get the jobs and economic benefit that you'll measure in the piece, and that will stay in, usually irrespective of the ownership.
Tony?
Yeah, let me just comment. One of the things I did in my Christmas holidays was chaired one of the task and finish groups. And part of that involved a lot of my friends who were sat on the front row there, and the question of the NHS involvement in R&D in the UK. And I would say, at least from my lens, first of all, it's clear, and Patrick, correct me if I misspeak in this, that engagement's higher in the NHS if NHS staff are involved in research, number one. So I think this should be a goal for all of us, and I welcome the changes that have already been made, for example, in simplifying some of the contracting associated with the O'Shaughnessy report. But everything I described in the context of building translational networks which give us unique insights into the path of biology that underpins disease and its intervention, none of that gets off the ground unless we can fix the clinical trial proposition. And we're still in a world where, unfortunately, the proportion of individuals in active clinical trials is diminishing. And so I really would urge that we focus on this. And I think part of the point I would leave as an opportunity is that we ensure that we incentivize those who are involved in clinical trials in the right way.
Thank you. Nicola?
Thank you. Great questions. They touch on the heart of what is challenging. As someone who spent 20 years in sort of Whitehall and Westminster, one of the biggest challenges is getting different parts of the system to work together and measure the same things at the same time. So the questions follow each other brilliantly. I mean, I know that there was a lot of effort with the Life Sciences Sector Plan and the 10-year plan to align on priorities and make sure that the policy agenda was aligned, but that is different than making sure that the implementation and the delivery is aligned. And so that I'm sure that this is completely within Steve's control right now, and he is sort of working between sort of all the different parts of the system to make sure that works. We have lots of examples of where it falls down because it is actually challenging to work across broad distributed systems and make sure that they align and you get the incentives right. Some of it's about getting the incentives right. Some of it, actually, as Peter has said, is about making sure you measure the right things and so you know what you're prioritizing. And I mean, if I was pitching for things to prioritize, I would think it would be speed of clinical trials, speed of access to data, making sure that we improve speed of adoption within the clinic so that actually patients and the public see benefit from what we're doing. And there are a number of other things, but those would be my top three. And I'm sure that John has some others that he would like to add. And so by the time we're finished, Steve will go home with a laundry list.
John? Yeah, so first of all, on this issue about alignment with the NHS and is that working? I think it's really important to remember that the NHS is an organization in pretty serious trouble at the moment, so they got lots of stuff to keep them occupied. Whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing that they're focused on is, I think, a second-order question. And that's why I think I'm trying to make the point that it's actually kind of up to us to help them get to a better place, because what they've got is a burning platform, and it's burning pretty actively at the moment. But they're not the only people in the world with that problem, and I think we've got to understand it takes a long time for that to move to a different place. And I think they've got a whole set of incumbencies that make it difficult for them to do things differently than they did in 1956. And I mentioned the doctors before. That's a classic example. The doctors do what the doctors do. If you say to the doctors, well, we want you to do something else, I promise you they're not going to do it. So I think they've got a set of issues. And I think my approach to this is to be pretty tolerant to the fact that they're in a pretty tight space. It is, I would agree with you, it's not aligned, but they do try. And Genomics England is a perfect example of how they have tried. And it does make a difference. On this wider issue about what does success look like, I think we've had a couple of metrics, and I think they're all right. But one of the advantages of having done this for a few decades is that you guys have no idea how bad this was 25 years ago. I mean, bad. It was terrible. The universities didn't spin out companies. Academics and universities thought that if you did spin out a company, you were some horrible sort of person. We never talked to the industry of any kind. There was absolutely zero capital for starting up companies anyway. And that has now all fundamentally really changed. All the big universities are very active hubs for spin-out companies. There's quite a lot of money for startups of those companies in almost all the big institutions. There's lots of it going on. I think where we miss out is this scale-up business that Steve was mentioning. But, that's getting a bit better. And I think we've just got to, you got to keep going at these things. They're not going to happen overnight. But I think you have to look back and recognize the progress in this space has been enormous. So I think that's an important issue.
That's. Oh yes, of course, Steve. Yeah.
So just on the NHS lineup point, what's worked? If you look around at what's worked and what perhaps there's some more emphasis on. So I remember the old-fashioned ways of top-down NHS management, and there's a bit of that back around in the 10-year plan. And for the first time, clinical trials are set as a target, which means that if you're part of the NHS that looks to central leadership, this is in the goal. And that planning guidance is out for a couple of years, which we've not had for a while. So if there's any brain power left after the line of ambulances, then some of that can go towards this agenda in a way that we've not seen for a couple of years. Second is the point that John made about BioNTech, which is that we've got areas where they have had good experience, and if you build around clinical communities that are working well, it's not their first rodeo, and they know what they're doing, and they see the benefit of that in their disease area. So I think we've got good ones where we know that we've had a couple of wins, and that's a good way of thinking about it. And I think third, there is the opportunity with some of the non-traditional NHS clinical centres that got a taste for trials during COVID, that there's still some communities there that want to go and do this. And if you get that right, those are the three that I think we can work through.
Right. And of course, Tony made the point there that just the difficulty of getting enough patients into these. What is the more that what more can be done on that, Steve?
Well, I think patients are quite into this. I mean, some of the when we were at the vaccine task force, we had thousands of people signing up all the time, and people sort of expect the charities will tell you they expect to be able to be given information for this, and we do that. But then we make it very difficult sometimes, or put hurdles in the way of people finding out what's available or what's on. I actually think there's many people who want to be involved, and it's the bureaucracy of getting the trials set up rather than the patients that's the barrier.
Right. Thanks. I'm now going to go to a couple of interventions on Slido and start with Nicola because they follow on from the flow of what we've been talking about. One from Slido. We've heard from brilliant policymakers and large companies, but what does life look like for a tiny life sciences startup spin-out? What are the challenges? And I'm thinking partly of your role at Oxford on that. And secondly, an observation, really, on mission research. France and INSERM might be a good example. 9 billion euros, all life sciences funding in one box. Do we have too many funders too thinly spread? But particularly that first one, the startup spin-out culture. You're very involved in this, Nicola. Why don't you set the ball rolling?
Yes, so one of the other things I do is I chair Oxford University Innovation, which is the technology transfer office that spins IP out of Oxford. And we, as John has said, have become dramatically better over the years at how we do this. And Oxford is now the most successful university at spinning IP out in Europe. We spin out more companies, we attract more inward investment, and we still have more further to go. But this is more investment than anywhere in Europe. This isn't just in the UK. So we can be proud of how far we have come, but we know that we have further to go. If you are a life sciences company in the UK, you're probably feeling quite sorry for yourself at the moment because the global market environment for capital has been incredibly tough and tight for the last couple of years. There has been a significant slump, and accessing that capital has been really difficult. However, that's starting to loosen now. There's evidence of more M&A activity, more IPO activity. We can see that there's the start of a warming up. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are a number of things that really matter to getting your IP out, and one of them is having the right funding at the right stage to initiate the entrepreneurship journey, and having proof of concept funding right at the early stage when you identify that your research might be commercial is really important. We don't have enough of this yet, but Innovate UK launched a proof of concept fund last year, and we have a match fund at Oxford, and we found that when that was launched by Innovate, our applications to the proof of concept fund at Oxford increased by 287%. This indicates that there is a huge appetite for entrepreneurship within our universities that is as yet untapped. There is headroom for this, and there is a determination from leadership across universities, and I see Geraint Rees here from UCL, who is very keen on this as well, to make sure that not only are the structures there within the university infrastructure, but the policies are there as well, and there are a few things that need to change. One of them is a simplification of the research environment. A second one is making sure that when academics do innovation, they get the benefit of that within their promotion pipeline, because at the moment they don't benefit. And the last one is that we do need to have the scale-up capital, and that is starting to improve, but it's just not where it needs to be right now.
Thank you very much. Quick comments to the rest of the panel, because I know we've got some other questions in the room. John?
No, I mean, Nicola said much of what I would have said, so that's helpful.
Right. Steve, and actually, I'm going to ask you a supplementary question about following on from what Nicola said. We've now got this framework, Patrick Vallance is very keen in it, where we've got a bigger role for British Business Bank, we've got the National Wealth Fund. Are you actively plugging into them to help with the scale-up funding? That's another key problem.
Yes, is the simple answer to that. And actually those institutions with 4 billion of cash in a new way are a transformational moment that we'll look back on and realise that they are catalysing some really important things. Startups need great people, great science, great money, and somewhere to do it. And what you want to be is at the heart of an ecosystem that's got all of those things. The UK is the best place in Europe for those things. People, you need to be able to hire people who will take a risk on a small company. They'll take a risk on a small company if they think there's another one down the road, or in a place like ARC, like this, because if this one doesn't work out, they can go somewhere else without having to move family and kids. The CEOs will go anywhere in the world, but it's the 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 that you need to think about if you're building a company. Capital's getting better, and the science is first rate. So that's why the UK is a great place, despite all the challenges to do startup and scale up here.
Tony, what's your perspective from GSK?
Yeah, I mean, we're very broadly engaged across all of the strata that we've mentioned. I'd say the one thing that I often lament is when somebody ships up, and by the way, at the end of the day, the people who buy most of the innovation that we're talking about are folks like me. And so the advice is the key thing. So because I do lament the fact when I'm in front of someone who has a great piece of technology applied to the wrong problem, and making sure that we get alignment of this is a place where if you bring me data, I'll believe you, and this is a place where I'll have a million questions, and that is difficult to get, and I think we really do need to work on creating those connections in a more seamless fashion for the future.
Very interesting, thank you. Now, we're going to collect some more questions. I think, yes, on this side, I think there's 2, or let's collect the 3 questions towards the front here, starting there, yep, and then over there, yep.
Hi, Henry Lee from Tony Blair Institute. So I'm really glad that the panelists picked up on an important point that the UK needs to focus on what it's good at. It has unique strengths. But at the same time, the story of invented in UK, but finding growth and success elsewhere is becoming a bit cliche now. And also the Lord's Science Committee recently had a report literally called Bleeding to Death. Slightly alarming, and TBI had a similar report talking about startup to scale up. This morning I was at the roundtable about quantum technology, and the example there is IonQ. The sale of IonQ by Oxford is a story in that vibe. So what I was thinking is, do panelists have some thoughts on how to navigate these two tensions, the tension between these two things, and what would be a minimum viable sovereign mix of capability and capacity look like that would ensure that UK create dependencies from other countries in the value chain and ensure that UK has a critical role to play in the global industrial innovation system in this complex geopolitical landscape? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually, if I may, going to hold on the next 2 because what you've said ties in with a question that's been upvoted. This recent House of Lords Science and Technology Committee report, Bleeding to Death, the Science and Technology Growth Emergency, which is about the scale-up challenge. And I think IonQ was valued at 2.5 billion and is now at 26 billion, and most of that gain will have accrued to the people after the sale of the Oxford IP. So there is a challenge there. John, you're also very close to all this. Your observations?
Yeah, so I think there is a solution to this problem, and I've been banging on about this for about 5 years, and that is, if you look at the total pension assets of the UK nation, there's about £3.5 trillion of money, most of which is sitting in gilts and returning, incidentally, if you have a pension, an absolutely de minimis return on your money sitting in those. So we've got a bad pension system which is going to blow up because people are going to find they get to retirement age and they don't have the money to look after themselves. And secondly, that money has not been put to work for the benefit of the UK economy, or indeed for any economy. But and there's a whole set of people who are conflicted in this space, who are making money off this, and a regulatory environment which is really pretty profoundly inhibiting to people getting into the right place. So let me just tell you what the Canadians and Australians have done. Of course, the Canadians and Australians way ahead of you guys for a whole variety of obvious reasons. And that is that they have got big pension funds. Yeah. They have a wide set of asset allocations, including venture and private equity. They return between 10 and 14% a year, just like any really good endowment. And that money acts as a sovereign wealth fund for the whole bloody country. And not only that, but they have great pensions at the end of it. So that's not that complicated, guys, because other people have done it. But boy, oh boy, trying to get that sort of, David, you're going to have to help us with this because this is a really serious problem.
Right. I might report in a moment on the views of a certain Mr. Torsten Bell, who does have it in his interest. Nicola.
I mean, I think, John said most of it. I think where we might sort of want to think a little bit also is about the risk appetite within our investment community in the UK versus competitors, and about the sort of technical expertise within those investment communities, given that biotech in particular can be highly technical and highly regulated, and thinking about how we could accelerate the process of building up some of that technical expertise which might underpin confidence in risk allocation.
Yep, very good. Tony?
I won't talk about the financial components of it, which I agree with. I mean, I think the opportunity here is earlier partnership with people like me as well, because a lot of those scale-up costs come in things that I am scaled at and very capable of providing advice and opportunities to navigate the pitfalls that are associated with them. And so what I would love to see is a greater appetite for earlier partnering with appropriate risk structures, and then as well as money, you get sound advice to get you to a point where ultimately the product is one that is straightforward, wanted, as I mentioned earlier, and ultimately straightforward to scale into commercial manufacturing. For example, if we look at that side of the equation.
Steve?
So Tony's right that actually advice is really, really important for smaller scaling companies. One of the great things about events like London Life Science Week and other things is that in the UK ecosystem, people will bump into people, lots of dodgy sandwiches and odd canapes. But those interactions really, really are important for building your network. Because a person's got to trust you when they're going to buy the thing from you. They're going to trust you if they're going to share where they've gone wrong because they've done it before. That is really important, and that is a de-risking piece. The agenda of getting Britain's wealth to back Britain's innovators is one that we've been on for a while, and I know is central to how the Treasury are thinking about growth. It is a technical challenge. We've just got to keep going, but the central idea that other countries put more of their wealth to backing their innovative economy than we do, and we need to solve that problem, is the one that we should solve for. The way I explain it to people is, if you know anybody from Australia, or you're going over there, you've got rallies, get them to take you through what they get each year about their pensions, and then look at what you get from your pension provider, and you'll see how different it is, and that's all we're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, one tiny thing I would add is that, we talk a lot about fixing the problem at the point of the pensions and the investment professionals. We don't talk as much about upskilling the education system around finance. And I know there's just been a national curriculum review, and I would make a bid for finance education taking a much more prominent part, because I think we fall down on that as a nation.
I think if Torsten were here, one of the points he would make is that unlike Canada and Australia, ours has been a relatively fragmented system, and certainly if you compare our local government pension scheme arrangements, which are an important part of that aggregate, and that's why there is an agenda of trying to bring them together to create fewer, bigger funds, which are better able then to allocate some of their resources to things like venture capital. And the Mansion House process, which began, of course, under Jeremy Hunt, there is definitely, I would say now, a willingness to say that the hope is that there is more investment in UK equity as a result, but there is hovering in the background the chance that it may become something which the government mandates. And there are indeed some trustees who would say, rather than be faced with all these tricky questions and relating it to their legal obligations, on which sometimes they get incredibly cautious advice, so there are some trustees who would say they would rather be mandated than have to take all these decisions themselves. But that is, as Steve said, very much on the agenda. Now, I think that...
David, just to add one little bit, we have to remember that the pension system is the subject to massive tax benefits across the piece. So that it's not as if there's no levers. If you want to consolidate it, just say, if you want the tax benefit, consolidate and don't be in a fund that's worth less than 500 billion. I mean, it's really easy, but you have to make me the emperor, and then I'll do that in the first day.
The only title you haven't got, John.
Yes.
Everybody note, this was the beginning of John's campaign for World Emperor.
What we just need is a government that understands the problem and has a very large majority that it can use to ram this thing through. I thought that was the idea. Right. Questions. There was 2 questions here. You've been very patient. Yeah. Right.
Andrew Morris, HER UK, and also President of the Academy of Medical Sciences. 4 terrific talks. To reassure you, John, Patrick Vallance was in China yesterday and said collaborate on health, agriculture, and planetary sciences. So that's good news. My question's about skills. So what do the panel think? Are there any gaps in terms of the UK life sciences workforce of the future as life sciences becomes increasingly computational? And how are we doing with entrepreneurial translation skills?
Right, thank you. Yep.
Patrick Chinnery from the Medical Research Council, which is part of UK Research Innovation. So how important is discovery science for the delivery of the UK life sciences sector plan? And if you think it's important, would you do it differently?
Oh. Steve, why don't we start with those with you?
So the fundamental science is absolutely core to it. I described it as being, you need great science, great people, and the money for somewhere to do it, to get this to fly. I know that I'm not the person to make decisions about what science should be done. We've got great people like you to pick the right one, so I'm going to leave that one to people who are far better qualified than me to do that. On the point about skills, I think that there are Brits around the world who would be lovely if they came back and did it here for some of those things. We've got fantastic people making fantastic amounts of money and leading great companies. Some of them happen to be in the US, some of them happen to be in Switzerland, some of them happen to be here, but there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the entrepreneurial leadership that we can develop. And also we want to be open to talent that can come from around the world that has learned in different environments. We need a mix of that. So I think and the next generation, I always think if you go and look at the organisations that Nicola's in charge of in Oxford, you go and see that room of faces. I'm not worried about entrepreneurial talent in the UK. I think that is bubbling. I think we need to link it faster to give it the right advice and help that speed up more quickly. The point about have we got the right skill sets for the ever-changing environment that is the linkage between tech and bio or life sciences and computational skills, I think is the right challenge. I don't know the answer to this, but I know that the types of people that people are looking to hire now in small companies are very different to the types of people they're trying to hire 3-5 years ago. I'm not very good at predicting where that's going to be in 3 or 5 years' time, but undoubtedly keeping an eye on it, working out which of the bits that need people, which of this is going to be done by large chunks of AI, and keeping everybody up on that is exactly the right thing to do.
John, do you want to comment? And I'm always going to ask you to follow up on the passing observation about China, because you're right, Patrick has been out there. But you, I know, are one of the people who think that UK Biobank and BGI should be able to collaborate. And do you regard that as the kind of collaboration that should happen as a result of visits such as Patrick's?
Yeah, I think in that space, I don't think there's any downside. And the scale of the data that you would get if you stuck them together would be fantastic. And the same applies to our future health. It should be in the same pot of stuff that's going on. So I think we can do a lot better if we really do want to be players. And don't forget, America is now massively disabled by several things, which I won't go into, but we all know that there's been massive disruption of what used to be the flag bearer for the whole life sciences industry. They are now in free fall, as we know. So, if we want to step up, it's best to have really good allies, and it may well be that China is one of our better allies. Could I also just say on the skills point, David, one of the things where I think we've got a real skill shortage is we've got lots of little companies. We don't have many people who can really run those companies at the highest level. The kind of sparkle you see from really good leaders who know how to do it, who can get from A to B. I don't want to downplay, there are a lot of people out there trying their best. But when you see it, it's fantastic. And I mean, one of the things I'm doing, I'm spending quite a bit of time with Clive Meanwell and those guys, and it's eye-wateringly good, I have to tell you. They know exactly what to do, in what order, how to raise the money, how to do it. And that's how they can take Metsera from nothing to 10 billion in 2 years.
Yep.
So we need a lot more of that.
Yep. Yeah. Tony, and tell us a little bit about you guys in China as well.
So let me start first of all by connecting the question my two friends and colleagues asked, and then I'll come back to China. So I think that the point that you both raise is tremendously important, and my perception is that I don't think anybody really has yet grasped what an enormous change AI/ML is going to bring to all of this. I mean, who plays with any of the cutting edge frontier models? Can you put your hand up if you interact with them? Can I suggest that you go and try? Because what becomes apparent from that is that these are already at the level of a very good PhD student. And unlike a very good PhD student who needs 6 months to go and get you an answer, they do it in 10 minutes. I cannot stress enough the revolution that is coming from that in anything to do with pattern recognition or indeed programming, which is behind a lot of the linkage of data. But if you accept that everybody will eventually get there with that, we have to train more people for which that is the foundation and the basis of their training. And then the question becomes, how do we train people to do discovery science for verification? Because they very quickly get you to a point where, and here are the things that we don't know in the experiments that need to be done. Now, those answers, I think, also similarly need to come at scale. They need to come at enormous scale through that's functional genomics you mentioned earlier, or indeed what is happening at scale in China. And we've been partners with the Kadoorie Biobank with Oxford for some time now. And when I look at it at a global scale, I'm anticipating that the majority of the data that I use to make decisions is going to be from outside in the future. And what I'll be creating inside is the connectivity across those things. And it's a pivot for those measures that become so important. I don't have the answer because I worry about it myself, that actually the pace of change we don't really broadly grasp, and it is going to be transformational.
Right. Nicola?
So I'm going to give a slightly different voice here as someone who handles, a patient-facing clinical cohort. I would not at the moment think that integrating that with or having a very close relationship with BGI was the right thing to do, because you also have to remember the social contract which we have with the public and patients, and maintaining public trust in the use of that data, and consider the domestic ethical rules around the use of that data should there be sharing. And so I absolutely believe there can be UK, Chinese and UK other partnerships which will be highly beneficial for research and industry. I still think you have to have the highest of ethical standards and make sure that there is patient confidence and patient trust in how that is handled. And we have been extremely good in the UK at how we do that while still managing to generate research discovery. And so that is where I am right now, and there are still possibly ways to move on from that. And in particular, AI gives the opportunity to interrogate data in secure research environments without merging or mixing data, which solves many of the challenges which we have hitherto faced. So I'm not saying that that's a final view, but I think somebody on the panel had to say that.
And what's your view of Palantir?
Thank you. I'm not going to answer that right now, because I want to get. We're not going to have time to answer Patrick on the importance of discovery science, and I think the answer to that is there is no translational science without discovery science. So we have to maintain the strength, not only as it is, of our discovery science wheel, but we have to accelerate that more effectively. And I mean, if it was me and I was looking at what we were doing, I would be looking at all the points of that pipeline and the drivers, and how we can shorten them, cut out duplication, cut out complication, while still maintaining as much as possible the Haldane principle. And that is not a simple approach, but we had a question earlier about the complexity of the landscape and how that can lead to pieces of important discovery dropping out, of sort of academics losing their pathway because of lack of certainty with their career, and so on. And so I think there's a lot more we can do to strengthen the fundamentals of discovery science and the link through to translation for patient benefit, and I think we should be doing that.
Right. Now we're going to collect, there's one, I think, final question, and we're going to have quick answers so we can then move next door. Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to end up with a difficult question.
Oh.
My name is Matthew Fife. I'm Chief Scientific Officer at a Dundee and Oxford-based biotech company, Outrun Therapeutics. And I'm just looking to represent the biotech community, and you've just been talking about discovery. And Nicola mentioned this earlier, there are severe headwinds in venture-backed biotech, and there has been a huge number of redundancies in venture-backed biotech in 2024 and 2025. I've been made redundant myself. I work for Storm Therapeutics, a successful Cambridge-based biotech company, which has just closed so that its clinical assets are being developed in the United States. And it's a real massive problem. And you mentioned, Nicola, the seed stage. We talked about scale up. How can we ensure that the future pembrolizumabs stay in the UK? But even at a level, the discovery level, in between seed and that scale up level is carnage out there at the moment in time. Babraham Science Park is really pretty empty in Cambridge. There's a lots in Oxford going on as well. So right. Is government aware of this? Would it be higher profile if it was steel making, car making? Because we hear about Merck and Lilly, but not the smaller companies. It's just right. It's word of mouth.
Right, that is an important challenge, and we're going to and also an opportunity for the panelists to give any other final observations. And let's start with John and move along.
Yeah, so I feel your pain because there's a lot of it going on across the whole sector. I think it's one of the things that actually is quite hard to do, particularly if you come out of an academic background, is that this sector ebbs and flows with a whole variety of different things. But, you know, the 2001 crash was a massive crash, and it had a tail of about 4 years. And then there was another crash in 2009, lots of people lost their jobs. It is a feature of the sector.
It's a feature of success as well, because it's growing.
It is, yeah. And I just, I have a lot of sympathy for people who lose their jobs because of that. But I think the ones who are resilient pop up again, as you have. You get another job, another company, and sooner or later, if you keep going, you're going to have success, and you will be personally rewarded, but you'll also have the satisfaction of having done something that really has big impact. So, there's no easy cure. That where governments have stepped in to try and fix this problem, and they tried to do this in Germany, it is a complete disaster. So, This has got to operate within the capital markets. It's a private sector issue. It's going to ebb and flow, and I think people just need to be helped to get from one job to the next and to keep going.
Thanks, John. Nicola?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is yes. We do know, I work with sort of many entrepreneurs and innovators across the Oxford environment and much further around, and I know exactly how hard it is while not being an entrepreneur myself. And I cannot express how much I admire the risk that is taken by those who decide to take part in the creation of a new company which will drive not only discovery but also potentially new therapeutics, new diagnostics for patients who need it so desperately. And also, this is part of the engine
of the UK economy. So firstly, what you have been doing and what you do is known and it is noticed and is not happening, in some black hole where we don't see it. It is seen, it is appreciated. So I want to say thank you to anybody here who is an entrepreneur and takes that risk and puts their family at risk, because that is what happens within this environment, and it is incredibly scary. And I know that people are up at night and they're up sort of with stress and all those kinds of things. And so that's the first point. The second point is, as John has said, there is no easy fix to macro market challenges, but there are things that we can do in the UK in order to give our UK environment the best possible chance. A lot of that is in the life sciences sector plan. A lot of that we've spoken about on this panel. But I also think that the way we're going to do this best is to take feedback from those like yourself and others in the environment who have been through the pain and can say, what would have really helped? It would have been this. And one of the people who I think is really best placed to do that is Steve, because that was basically his job at the BIA. And so we have leading our national conversation somebody whose expertise is making sure that we can increase the resilience of this sector as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Tony?
Just two very quick comments. First of all, Nicola, in terms of data, let me reassure you that the first thing we do before we integrate is check all of the compliance requirements. And it's critically important because it is very easy to find yourself in a place where there are pitfalls associated with it. So if you're going to integrate, you need very strong data governance. That is core to what we do. Let me just, at some level, and Steve, you'll be able to qualify this one way or another. I think it is a tipping point problem. I lived in Boston for 7 years, as I said. The ecosystem there breathes in and out, but it's very well accepted that there are a cohort of people who spend their whole career going through the cycles that you described, and at some level scale answers the problem. Another angle on it, though, we work in the collaborations that I mentioned with Oxford and Cambridge and King's, and what we've done there is ensured that we have porous career opportunities through joint appointments, so that people don't only have to walk into another job, they can walk forwards and backwards along the cycle. My idea fails, I go back to my academic career for a few years and reinvent another one. And there's then no loss of continuity. So I think it is all about removing some of the barriers that in the past have been non-porous and creating a system through trust in which we allow people to have fantastic careers without fearing the change, because there's a number of directions they can go in to maintain their career if things do change.
Thank you. And Steve, the last word to you, Steve.
So I remember the Friday afternoon when Silicon Valley Bank was going down and the entire sector, small companies, were about to shut because they put their money into this bank that nobody else knew about, and it was folding in the States, but they had a UK subsidiary, and I just saw that coming. I didn't move from my chair really across that entire weekend, but as a result of government intervention, listening to the needs of small companies, by Monday morning, that company, Silicon Valley Bank UK, had been bought by HSBC Innovation, and companies were able to continue trading. So those of us, you can be confident that we absolutely get and understand the needs of companies that don't have the biggest high-profile names, Tony, in the ecosystem, the value of those people, and I personally have fought for them. And I think, to be frank, the government system understands, even if it doesn't remember the name of all of those companies. You're right. There's a bit of there's no end to boom and bust through life sciences. It's tough in Boston at the moment. It's boom time in Shanghai, but the one thing that we've got, I think, is bounce back ability. And one of my favourite British words, I'm not sure that translates wonderfully to the Americans, but bounce back ability from football terms. We understand relegation and promotion in the UK, and we do come back. We come back differently, and we come back, as you say, in the new world, because we understand that actually the biotechs of 2030 are going to look very, very different from the biotechs of 2010, and we've got to be adaptable and able to do that. I do that with confidence.
Something that people from politics might recognise as well. Well, thank you. And Steve, that was a fantastic note on which to end. And I think thank you for your question. It is a reminder, as Nicola said, of the ups and downs and the challenges that people face, but they face those challenges in a very worthwhile cause. So thank you to our 4 excellent panelists. Thank you for participating. Thank you also to our online participants. And also, thank you to ARC for your hospitality. And I think we're going to carry on enjoying that next door for a little while longer. Thank you all very much indeed.